It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, a break from everything, just a few days in the woods with friends. The kind of escape that was supposed to heal old wounds and bring laughter back into my life. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I had been struggling with my own demons, the loss of my mom still fresh in my mind, and I had hoped that this trip would help me forget, even if just for a few days. When we arrived, the forest seemed peaceful at first, quiet, untouched, like something out of a movie. The sunlight filtered through the trees, and for a moment, I felt like everything would be okay. The others were excited, joking around as we set up our tents and prepared our campfire. I could hear them laughing, their voices carrying through the air. But I wasn't really there. My mind was elsewhere, lost in memories of a life that felt so far away. That evening, after the sun dipped below the horizon, we gathered around the fire. I stared into the flames, hoping for some kind of comfort, when one of the guys, Kyle I think, started telling a story about the forest. It was a local legend, something the caretaker of the campsite had mentioned earlier. He spoke about a creature, an entity, that haunted the woods, watching people who camped there. According to the story, the creature would wait until the perfect moment, and then, well, no one knew what happened next. The thought sent a chill down my spine, but everyone else just laughed it off. "It's just a story," Kyle joked, tossing another log onto the fire. But there was something in his eyes, something uneasy, as if he didn't entirely believe what he was saying. I told myself it was nothing, just a silly ghost story to pass the time. But as I lay in my tent later, the quiet of the woods felt suffocating. I had been trying to sleep, but the wind howled through the trees, and there were sounds, small, subtle, like whispers in the distance. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was just the forest settling, but the more I listened, the more the sounds seemed to grow. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then the whispers grew louder, clearer, like someone was speaking just beyond the edge of my hearing. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. The others were asleep, unaware. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. I peered out of the tent, half expecting to see something, anything. But the darkness outside was impenetrable. The wind carried strange noises, but there was no sign of life, nothing that could explain the dread building in my chest. I lay back down, pulling the blanket over my head, but sleep wouldn't come. The whispers kept rising and falling, as if they were circling around me, waiting for me to react. I couldn't tell if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or if there was something, someone, out there, lurking just beyond the reach of the firelight. The longer I lay there, the more it felt like the forest was pressing in on me, the trees reaching out with their long, silent fingers. My mind raced, imagining all sorts of terrible things. And then, just when I thought I might finally drift off, I heard it. A sound. Soft, but unmistakable. A footstep. It was faint at first, barely audible over the wind. But it was there. I held my breath, straining to hear it again. Another step. Closer this time. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. It was too dark outside to see anything, but the sensation of being watched intensified. The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating. I waited, too afraid to make a sound, my eyes fixed on the dark outline of my tent entrance. The footsteps had stopped, but the air felt wrong, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I wanted to scream for help, but my throat was dry, too tight to make a sound. What was out there? Who was out there? And why couldn't anyone else hear it? The whispers continued, soft and indistinct, but unmistakable. I held my breath, straining to hear. The night was thick with silence, except for those voices. The wind had died down, and the only sound left was the soft rustling of the trees, but the whispers didn't stop. They seemed to circle around my tent, coming from all directions, like they were deliberately trying to make me listen. My fingers gripped the edge of my sleeping bag as my mind raced. Was it just the wind? Or was something out there, waiting? I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. It wasn't like I hadn't heard weird things when camping before. The forest was full of strange sounds, animals, insects, the creaking of trees. But this was different. This felt intentional. I could almost feel the weight of the voices pressing in on me, like they were inside my head. Then, without warning, the tent flap rustled. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, too scared to move. There was no way the wind could do that. No way it could make the flap move like that. I reached for the flashlight beside me, my hand trembling. Slowly I pulled the zipper open, trying to make as little noise as possible. But when I peeked outside, there was nothing there. Just the dark, empty forest staring back at me. I pulled the flap closed and quickly latched it, my heart pounding against my chest. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, that I was overreacting. But something in the back of my mind told me it wasn't. I could still hear the whispers, now faint but persistent, echoing through the woods. I closed my eyes and tried to shut it out, but sleep wouldn't come. The next morning, I didn't tell anyone what had happened. How could I? They'd just laugh at me, say I was imagining things. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt heavier now, charged with an unease I couldn't explain. We went about our day like nothing had happened, hiking, swimming, enjoying the sun. But I kept looking over my shoulder as if I was expecting to see someone standing just beyond the trees. When night fell again, I was more on edge than ever. As we sat around the fire, I kept hearing things, faint sounds just outside the reach of my hearing. Footsteps, someone moving in the distance. The others were too busy talking to notice, but my attention was fixed on the dark, the space beyond the firelight. Every rustle in the bushes, every creak of a branch made my stomach twist in fear. I tried to act normal, but deep down, I knew something was out there. Something was watching us. I could feel it. And as the night dragged on, that feeling only grew stronger. Firelight. A twig snapping in the distance, the faint rustle of leaves, and that same distant whispering. This time, I wasn't alone in feeling it. I noticed Kyle glancing over his shoulder, his eyes wide, his smile forced. Rachel, who usually loved the outdoors, seemed quieter than usual, her gaze constantly shifting toward the dark woods beyond the fire. The atmosphere had changed. It felt thick, almost suffocating. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked quietly, my voice barely louder than the crackling of the fire. Everyone fell silent for a moment, listening. At first, nothing. Then, in the distance, just on the edge of the trees, there was a soft, almost inaudible whisper. I saw the others stiffen, their expressions faltering. "Probably just an animal," Kyle said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. But I could tell he didn't believe it. None of us did. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I tried to ignore the growing sense of dread gnawing at me. Rachel shifted uncomfortably, glancing around. "Maybe we should head back to the tents," she suggested, her voice unusually high-pitched. Reluctantly, we agreed, and we all began to gather our things. But as I looked around, the forest seemed to close in on us, the darkness pressing tighter, as if it was watching, waiting. Emily, who had always been so calm, was now moving quickly, her eyes darting nervously from shadow to shadow. That night, I could barely sleep. The whispers were louder now, like they were right outside my tent. Every rustle, every snap of a twig made my heart race. I kept checking my phone, the screen illuminating my anxious face in the pitch dark, hoping for a sign of something normal. A text, a call, anything to ground me. But there was nothing. Suddenly the whispering stopped. Everything went dead silent. The only sound now was the wind, but even that had died down. And then I heard it. A faint scratching noise, like nails against the fabric of my tent. My breath caught in my throat. My pulse thundered in my ears. I stayed frozen, staring at the fabric in front of me, too scared to move. Then, the scratching grew louder, more insistent, like something, or someone, was trying to get in. Panic surged through me, and I barely managed to whisper, "Kyle?" There was no response. I called out again, louder this time, but still nothing. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a single, sharp, low growl. My heart dropped. I held my breath, terrified to make a sound. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of someone walking. Slow, deliberate footsteps, just outside my tent. I pressed my back against the fabric, willing myself to disappear. The footsteps circled around the tent, as if whatever it was inspecting us. It stopped for a moment, and in that silence, I could feel its presence. Then, without warning, it rushed past me, moving so fast that the air seemed to shift. I didn't dare open the flap. I didn't dare look outside. I stayed as still as possible, my heart hammering, my body rigid with fear. When morning finally came, it felt like a cruel joke. The night had stretched on for hours, but when the sunlight filtered through the trees, it almost felt like it had all been a dream. Almost. The others were shaken, their faces pale, but no one spoke about the events of the night. Instead, we packed up quickly, eager to leave. But something was wrong. I could still feel the presence, that unshakable sense of being watched. As we packed our things, I noticed a trail of footprints leading away from our campsite, deep into the woods. They were too large, too uneven to belong to any animal I knew, and they led straight into the dense forest. No one else seemed to notice. I turned to Kyle, about to ask if he saw them too, but he was already heading toward the car. We all left quickly, and as we drove away, I couldn't help but feel that the forest was still watching us, still waiting. And deep down, I knew. Whatever it wasn't finished with us yet. To get in. The fabric of my tent trembled with the force of each scratch, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to scream, but the fear was paralyzing, trapping me in the darkness, unable to make a sound. Each scrape was so deliberate, so unnatural, that it felt like something was purposefully tormenting me. I didn't dare look outside. I couldn't bring myself to do it. My mind raced, trying to think of a logical explanation, but nothing made sense. The wind couldn't make this noise, and no animal could scratch at my tent like this. The noises were too deliberate, too human. And then, just as quickly as it started, the scratching stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. I lay there, listening, waiting for something, anything. But nothing came. Time seemed to stretch on forever in the darkness. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep, still gripped by that lingering sense of being watched. Morning came, but the peace it promised never reached me. When I stepped out of the tent, the forest seemed unchanged, as if the horrors of the night hadn't happened. The others were already awake, but none of us spoke about what had occurred. It was as if we all knew something was wrong, but no one wanted to say it aloud. As we went about the morning routine, making breakfast, gathering firewood, I noticed something strange. The trees seemed different. Not in a visible way, but in the way they loomed, casting long, dark shadows over the campsite. The forest no longer felt like a peaceful escape. It felt like something was hidden in its depths, something waiting for us to slip up, to get too comfortable. Rachel was the first to notice. "Guys, look at the trees," she said, her voice shaking. We all turned. There, in the trunks of several nearby trees, were deep gouges, scratches so long and sharp they almost seemed like claw marks. But they weren't random. They were organized, as if something had deliberately carved into them, and they all pointed in the direction of our campsite. "That's not normal," Kyle said, his voice low. He had always been the brave one, the skeptic, but now his usual confidence was gone. We stood there, in a circle, staring at the marks in silence. A cold wind picked up, rustling the leaves, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of the forest pressing down on me. It wasn't just watching us. It was marking us, tracking us. That afternoon, as we packed up to leave, things took a turn for the worse. We decided to hike a different trail to get back to the car, hoping it would take us out of the woods faster. But as we walked deeper into the forest, the familiar path we'd taken on the way in seemed to disappear. The trees started to look unfamiliar, and the air grew thick with tension. Suddenly we heard something behind us, a snap of twigs, the sound of footsteps, too soft to be an animal, too deliberate to be the wind. We all stopped, frozen, our eyes darting around. But there was nothing, just the dense forest closing in on us from all sides. "Let's keep moving," Rachel whispered, grabbing my arm. Her grip was tight, like she was trying to pull me away from something. From what? I didn't know, but I felt it too. The sense that we weren't alone, that something was following us. I kept looking back, but there was nothing there. Not at first. Then, between the trees, I thought I saw something move. Too quick to be a person, too large to be an animal. My heart skipped a beat. My breath caught in my throat, and then I heard it. Footsteps, closer this time, almost like breathing. Someone, or something, was there. "Run!" I screamed. We didn't look back. We just ran, through the trees, over the uneven ground, not caring where we were going. The only thing that mattered was getting away. The forest seemed to close in behind us, its shadows long and dark, as if it didn't want us to leave. When we finally reached the edge of the woods, gasping for breath, we looked back. There was nothing. The trees stood silent, still. But I knew something had been there. Something had been watching us. And as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, following us, waiting for the right moment to return. The horror of that camping trip never really left me. And to this day, whenever I hear a rustling in the trees or feel like something's watching me from the dark, I wonder, was it the forest itself? Or was something more sinister, something ancient and hungry, still out there, watching, waiting?